It was a typical weekday afternoon, and the subway car was packed with people commuting home from work. 7 individuals sat in a row, lost in their thoughts as the train rumbled along the tracks. Suddenly, the train screeched to a halt, and the lights flickered off. In the darkness, a scream rang out, followed by a sickening thud. The passengers sat frozen in fear for a moment, unsure of what had just occurred. As the lights flickered back on, they saw the source of the commotion. A man lay motionless on the ground, blood pooling around his head. It was clear he had been killed, but no one had seen who had done it. The subway operator quickly radioed for assistance, and as soon as the police arrived on the scene, they instructed the passengers to remain seated in the subway car. They quickly assessed the situation and realized that they were dealing with a murder case. The first thing they did was to secure the crime scene and ensure that no one tampered with any potential evidence. Once the crime scene had been secured, the police officers began to interview the passengers. They wanted to find out what each person had seen and heard in the moments leading up to the murder. The interviews were conducted one by one, and the police officers tried to be as thorough as possible. The first to be interviewed was an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen. She was a frail-looking woman who sat closest to the victim, and she was visibly shaken and struggled to recall the details of what had happened. The police officers were patient with her and allowed her to take her time to remember, and her hands shook as she recounted what she had seen. She had been dozing off when she heard the scream, and when she opened her eyes, she saw the man falling to the ground. She didn't see anyone else nearby, but she heard footsteps rushing away. The police officers took detailed notes of her account and thanked her for her cooperation. The next person to be questioned was a young woman named Emily. She had been sitting next to Mrs. Chen, but her account of the events differed greatly. Emily claimed she had been listening to music on her headphones and hadn't heard a thing until the lights flickered back on. She had seen the man lying on the ground, but hadn't seen anyone else around. The police officers were suspicious of Emily, and they asked her to remove her headphones to see if she could hear them speaking to her. Emily was surprised to hear the officers talking to her and realized that her noise-cancelling headphones were indeed powerful enough to block out the sound of the victim's fall. As the officers questioned the other passengers, they found that each had their own version of events. Some had seen the victim fall, while others had only heard the commotion. Some had seen someone running away, while others had seen no one at all. It quickly became clear that no one had seen the killer. The interviews with the other passengers continued for several hours, and the police officers were meticulous in their questioning. They asked the same questions repeatedly to ensure that they had a clear understanding of what had happened. They also asked follow-up questions to clarify any inconsistencies in the passenger's story. Through their interviews and analysis of physical evidence, the police officers were able to eliminate some of the passengers as suspects. However, they still had no clear idea of who the killer was. The officers took detailed notes of each person's account and compared them with each other. They tried to piece together a timeline of events and identify any inconsistencies in the passenger story. They also examined the physical evidence, including fingerprints and footprints, to try to identify the killer. The officers were stumped. With no clear suspect, they had to rely on physical evidence. They searched the subway car for anything that could help them identify the killer, but all they found were a few scattered fingerprints and footprints. Hours turned into days, and the investigation continued. The police interviewed dozens of witnesses, scoured CCTV footage, and analyzed every scrap of evidence. They even brought in a team of forensic experts to examine the fingerprints and footprints they had found. Finally, after a week of tireless work, the investigators made a breakthrough. They discovered that one of the passengers had been lying. Emily, the young woman who claimed she had heard nothing until the lights flickered back on, had been wearing noise-cancelling headphones that were powerful enough to block out the sound of the victim's fall. After the police officers realized that Emily's noise-cancelling headphones had prevented her from hearing the victim's fall, they became suspicious of her. They asked her to remove the headphones and tried to recreate the noise level in the subway car. But Emily continued to insist that she had not heard anything until the lights flickered back on. The officers were not convinced, and they decided to investigate Emily further. They searched her house and found a small knife with bloodstains on it. Emily immediately became defensive and claimed that the blood was from a cut she had sustained earlier in the day. The officers did not believe her, and they took her into custody for further questioning. As they interrogated her, Emily finally broke down and confessed to the murder. She admitted that she had been angry with the victim, a co-worker who had been promoted over her, and had followed her onto the subway to confront her. The story suggests that Emily had been passed over for a promotion that the victim had received, which had triggered her resentment and anger toward the victim. This implies that they worked in the same field and were potentially competing for the same job or position. The feelings of jealousy and resentment that Emily harbored towards the victim may have been simmering for some time. It is possible that she had observed the victim's behavior and achievements and became envious of his success. This could have led to Emily feeling that the victim had unfairly achieved the promotion that she desired. It is unclear whether the victim was aware of Emily's feelings towards him, but their relationship may have become strained due to the competition for promotion. They may have had conflicts or disagreements that were not resolved, leading to tension between them. The fact that Emily followed the victim onto the subway car suggests that she had planned to confront him about promotion. This indicates that she may have felt that the promotion was unjust or that she had been wronged in some way. Her emotions could have escalated during the argument, leading to a physical altercation that resulted in the victim's death. In summary, the relationship between the dead man and the murderer was that of co-workers who were potentially in competition for the same position. Emily harbored feelings of jealousy and resentment towards the victim, which may have been brewing for some time. The victim may have been unaware of Emily's feelings towards him, but their relationship may have become strained due to the competition for promotion. The confrontation on the subway car ultimately led to the victim's death. Emily's actions suggest that she had planned to confront the victim about promotion. She followed the victim onto the subway car, indicating that she had intentionally targeted him. As the argument escalated, Emily's emotions may have gotten the better of her, leading her to physically attack the victim. The exact nature of the attack is not described, but it is implied that it was severe enough to cause the victim's death. The fact that Emily was able to carry out the murder in a crowded subway car without attracting attention suggests that she was able to conceal her actions, or that the other passengers were too preoccupied to notice what was happening. Emily claimed that the victim had insulted her, and they had gotten into a physical altercation. In a fit of rage, Emily had grabbed the small knife from her bag and stabbed the victim. She then fled the subway car when the lights flickered off, hoping to blend in with the other passengers. The other passengers were shocked to learn that one of their own had committed the murder. They had all been so focused on their own accounts of the events that they had not considered the possibility that someone among them was the killer. The police officers thanked the other passengers for their cooperation and released them. They took Emily into custody and charged her with murder. The investigation had been a long and difficult one, but the officers were relieved that they had finally found the killer. Emily was arrested and charged with murder. The other passengers in the subway car were left to grapple with the realization that they had been in the presence of a killer, even if they hadn't known it at the time. The investigation had been long and grueling, but in the end, the killer had been found and justice had been served. The trial for Emily's case was set to begin in a few months, and the prosecutors had a strong case against her. The evidence was overwhelming, and Emily's confession had sealed her fate. The judge was convinced that she was guilty, and he sentenced her to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. The other passengers who had been in the subway car during the murder had mixed emotions about the verdict. Some were relieved that justice had been served, while others were still shaken by the fact that they had been in such proximity to a killer. For a few, it was a traumatic experience they would never forget. The investigation had also raised some questions about safety on the subway. Many people began to wonder if they were truly safe on public transportation. In response, the city government implemented new safety measures to prevent such incidents from happening again. They installed more CCTV cameras, increased the number of police patrols, and even introduced emergency intercoms in every subway car. Over time, the memory of the murder began to fade, and the subway returned to its usual routine. People continued to commute to and from work, and life went on as usual. However, for those who had been in that subway car, the memory of that fateful day would stay with them forever. The murder on the subway had been a tragic event, but it had also brought people together and reminded them of the importance of community and safety. It had been a wake-up call for the city, and it had led to positive changes that would benefit everyone who relied on public transportation.